Following the decisive victory of President-elect Donald Trump, some Democrats, well, they've had some second thoughts about the path that the radical element of their party is taking them down. Now, recognizing that a large majority of Americans simply do not agree with this radical agenda. A new poll conducted by Scott Rasmussen's RMG Research found that just 18% of voters, 18%, think that it should be legal to provide minors with puberty blockers, drugs, and/or surgeries to help them cosmetically become another gender. 72% say it should be against the law. These are numbers that reasonable Democrats can't ignore. So could we see more Democrats shift on the transgender issue following this past election? And why was it that Republicans were so successful on this issue, speaking frequently about it? Joining me now to discuss this and much more, Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, Director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bauwens, thanks for joining me today.
It's good to be with you, Tony.
So have we reached a tipping point on this issue? I mean, we've been talking about this for quite some time. What has brought us to this point where the American people are saying, yeah, this is crazy. We don't need to be doing this?
Well, I think, we've seen on full display a number of sports teams, young women having to face off with men. And we've seen the harms that have come to these young women, from volleyball to field hockey, the boxing ring. I mean, we've seen it on full display in our culture. And so people who may not be following the science and all of the things that we do regularly on this program, they've been involved in sports, and they've seen what's happened to young women, and they think this is really unjust. These young women have worked hard to get to where they're at, and they're having it taken away just because somebody has a different biology than they do. And there's a group of people who don't want to live in reality about that. So, I think Democrats have a real opportunity to be honest and embrace reality on this issue, because they have the science, they have public opinion, they have, culture with sports. It's all pointing to it's time to rethink your position here.
I mean, it has come to a point where even we have members of Congress now. We have a new member-elect, Sarah McBride. He is, I assume it's a he that is a she. And this has prompted Nancy Mace from North Carolina, South Carolina, to introduce legislation or rules in Congress to prohibit people from opposite biological sexes from using the opposite bathroom. I mean, I find this very interesting because it wasn't that long ago that we had this huge national debate over North Carolina when North Carolina said, look, we're not going to allow you to use a bathroom of the opposite sex. And we had sporting teams saying we're not going to North Carolina. We had, series being pulled from the state. But now we see this battle even raging in Capitol Hill, and most people see this as very common sense, that if you're a male, biological male, you use the men's restroom. Again, we've reached a point where it appears that most of Americans see through this nonsense that's been pushed by the left.
Yeah. I think we are at a real, thankfully, at a tipping point. And we also have a president-elect who has vowed to address this head on. And that's also very encouraging, as for many of us who've seen this at play for, decades now. And I think one thing that, in the recent controversy as Democrats are coming out about this, there was a Representative Moulton who he had a very interesting perspective. He shared on a few shows where he basically said, I've come out and said, let's have a conversation about this topic, the transgender topic, and he received a lot of backlash and, actually hang-ups from his colleagues. And I think that that picture really crystallizes what has been going on behind the scenes in the academic space and the medical, psychological professions, where there's absolutely no room, to quote the representative, there's no room for discourse. And that's just not going to fly these days. Thankfully, it's not going to fly in the face of all of the sway of public opinion that wants our government to deal with this and take action to protect children and to protect young women in sports.
You know, Dr. Bauwens, I think you're absolutely right. The sporting issue, fairness, has brought this to the forefront. It's no longer a theoretical issue. You know, we warned that these types of things would happen when we redefined marriage, because if you can redefine what is in natural law and has been, you know, throughout time the norm, just because of how you feel and what you want, there's no stopping that. So while I'm encouraged by this, I'm wondering if it will prompt more soul searching as to how we got here and how we prevent further devolving of understanding morality, biology, etc.
Yeah, I hope so. And one of the things that you hear right now from Democrats is, at least this is the way I was taking it, is that, you know, we hear the public and we are willing to have discussions to change our views. And that's good. I mean, because the government's for the people. It's not for an elected official. But you know, I'm hearing that, okay, we're just going to change because the tide is changing.
Right.
And again, that's good. But where is that moral compass, that plumb
And I
line
think-
that says, I'm doing this because of my beliefs and
And
vote for
I
me
think
because this is.
that's what has to be interjected into this conversation at this moment. Dr. Bauwens, thanks for sticking around.
Absolutely.
All right, so before I get into this Supreme Court case for December the 4th, I believe it is, on Tennessee's SAFE Act, that's the law protecting children, minors, from these experimental drugs and surgeries, I want to go back to where we were at as we came up to that break about how we take this moment to have the deeper conversations to probe how we got here and how we possibly restore the foundations. I mean, I think there's a teaching moment here. It's almost parabolic. We see this playing out before us, the sports issues, but how do we take that to have a deeper conversation?
Well, I think, you know, getting back to what truth is, you know, the Bible says that truth has fallen in the streets, and that we're to rescue truth, we're to grab hold of truth. And what has happened is that we have a party and many systems in our society that have completely relinquished truth and have based reality off of psychology, off of feelings, and what I want and desire, and what I'm also presented as a consumer. What, you know, as we see with the trans issue, psychology is and clinical practice has become consumer driven rather than good practice driven. So, you know, we have to come back to a place of really, well, for one, sharing the truth, sharing the truth in love with our neighbors and with those, having courageous discussions wherever possible. I think that these are really important and fundamental to our to the stability of our society and to carrying on in democracy. We can't have a democracy that's based on whatever fad
Right.
flies by the wind.
And silencing discussion in terms of how we reach consensus. You are working on a book with Walt Heyer, who has detransitioned. You have, you know, your background in studying in trauma. Let me ask this question, because you said this, we need to speak the truth in love, and I think we need to be looking at those who are struggling with gender dysphoria and understand that many of them have incidents and events in their past that have triggered that. And so there is, in some ways, it's a defense mechanism, and we need to be mindful of that and need to be, when we're approaching it, approaching it prayerfully and compassionately, but still truthfully.
Yes, that's right. And, we could step back from the transgender issue and think about, if you know someone who's ever struggled with hating a body part or, maybe obsessing about a body part. This might be far off for some people. If you remember Michael Jackson, he had some twinges of this. And if you just address that discomfort by having plastic surgeries and so on, you never get to the root issue. And so what happens with a lot of people who are treated in that way, then another hatred of something else of themselves pops up. And so this is the same thing that's happened on the transgender issue. We're not dealing with the root issues. And so, sometimes this issue can be very scary because it's so politically charged, but when we're dealing with someone who has this going on, there are deeper things that need to be addressed. So as much as possible that we can be open and wanting to learn about the person's experience while at the same time, not caving to a delusion, because that's
Right.
what it is. It's delusional.
Right. We cannot conflate love with affirmation. We need to love everyone, but we can't affirm every choice. Dr. Bauwens, just got a couple minutes left. The court case, December the 4th, the Tennessee measure that protects children. Talk about it. What's going to be before the court?
Yeah, so what is before the court is basically there are a number of states that have passed legislation to protect children from the transgender procedures, and Tennessee is the same. Essentially, there are some families in Tennessee that are trying to oppose that and say that they need the transgender procedures. So the Supreme Court is going to hear this case. And again, here we have another example of consumer-driven practices that are not based on science. So what we have done at Family Research Council, and along with other groups, we have submitted briefs that address the science, the true science that has been used to support these procedures, and we pull that apart and show how it is not good science. And also another argument that is very prominent on this case is that all the medical organizations are for transing kids. Well, we also address that in our brief and talk about how we could spend a lot of time on this, Tony, but there are a lot of systems at play that really need to be addressed, because just like as the representative said in our earlier, that I cited in our earlier segment, there's no room for these discussions. So you can
Right.
imagine how that plays out in the academic space and the scientific space when people are competing for money, for tenure, it's on and on. And so we do address that in our brief, along with many other groups, that you can't trust the medical profession on this topic at this time.
Unfortunate, but true. I'm sure we'll be talking about it more as we approach December the 4th. Dr. Bauwens, thanks for joining us. Always great to have you on the program.
Good to be with you, Tony.